name is Florence. I'm 34 years old, and I collapsed on the kitchen floor of my parents' house on a Tuesday morning in March, my vision tunneling into a pinpoint of light before everything went black. The last thing I remember is the sound of a ceramic mug shattering against the tile. Then nothing, until I woke up in an ambulance with a paramedic shining a light in my eyes, asking my name. This is Second Seat Stories, and this is the day I found out exactly who my family was. My father, Gerald, found me. My mother, Eleanor, called the ambulance. But by the time I was wheeled through the emergency room doors, they were already gone. I found out later from a nurse who assumed I already knew that my father had looked at me lying on the floor, checked his watch and said, "She fainted. She'll live. Our flight with your sister leaves at 6. My younger sister Wendy was getting married in Cancun that weekend. My parents had a connecting flight that afternoon they couldn't afford to miss. So they gave a brief statement to the responding officer and drove straight to the airport. My suitcase still packed for a trip I was never going to take, because I'd been the one asked to stay behind and house a sit while everyone else celebrated in the sun. The hospital admitted me with a diagnosis that terrified me more than the fainting spell itself. A severe cardiac arrhythmia, combined with dangerously low blood pressure, likely triggered by a medication interaction nobody had caught. The doctor said if I'd been alone in my apartment instead of my parents' house, I might not have been found in time. I spent that first night hooked to monitors that beeped through the dark, watching the doorway, certain someone would walk through any minute. Nobody did. I called my mother's cell twice before I gave up, understanding that whatever she was doing in Cancun mattered more than whatever was happening to my heart in that hospital bed. The days blurred together after that. 9 days in that ward, alone, watching other patients get balloons and flowers and homemade soup in Tupperware, while my own bedside table held nothing but a plastic cup of water and a call button. I pressed less and less as the days went on. The nurses became my only company. One in particular, a woman named Dolores, who ran the cardiac ward with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen every kind of family fail, started bringing me extra pudding cups from the cafeteria and sitting with me on her breaks. She never asked why nobody came. She just stayed. In the sterile loneliness of that room, her presence became the only thing that felt like family. On the 9th day, I heard voices in the hallway before I saw them, and my stomach dropped the way it used to when I was a kid, right before I knew I was about to be blamed for something I hadn't done. My parents strolled in with suitcases still tagged from the airport, tanned from the Caribbean sun, chatting with the nurses at the front desk like they were checking out of a hotel instead of checking on a daughter they'd abandoned. My father didn't apologize, didn't even sit down. He announced loud enough for the whole floor to hear that they were here to sign the discharge, papers, and take me home, as if 9 days of silence could be erased with a single administrative act. That's when Dolores stepped into the doorway of my room and blocked it with her body. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. "She's not yours to discharge anymore," she said. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. My father's face shifted from irritation to confusion. My mother's mouth opened and closed without a sound. I stared at Dolores, my heart monitor ticking faster on the screen beside me, wondering what she possibly meant. As far as I knew, I was still their daughter, still bound to them by blood and by every piece of paperwork a patient signs on the way into a hospital bed. She glanced at her clipboard, then back at my parents. "Ask the man," she began, then stopped and looked at me instead, like she was waiting for my permission to say a name none of us had spoken aloud in years. I said nothing. She took that as a yes and turned back to my parents. "Ask the man who's been calling this hospital every single day for the past 9 days, asking about her condition. Ask the man who updated her emergency contact information the morning she was admitted. Ask the man whose name is now listed as her medical power of attorney." My mother's face went pale under her tan. My father's jaw tightened the way it always does right before he realizes he's walked into something he doesn't control. I lay there gripping the thin blanket, trying to understand who Dolores could possibly mean, because the only people ever listed on my paperwork were the 2 strangers now standing in my doorway. The answer walked in less than a minute later. And it wasn't who I expected, it was Desmond, my downstairs neighbor of 6 years, A quiet, steady man who fixed my leaking faucet the first week I moved into my apartment, and had been bringing me coffee every Sunday morning ever, since never asking for anything more than conversation on the stairwell. I hadn't even realized. He knew I was in the hospital. It turned out that the morning I collapsed, my phone had been in my coat pocket. When the paramedics searched it for an emergency contact after my parents left the scene, they found his name saved under "in case of emergency," a line I'd filled in years earlier on a whim after a scary asthma attack, never once imagining it would actually matter. Desmond told me later he got the call while watering his own plants 2 floors below mine. He was at the hospital within the hour, and he hadn't stopped showing up since. My father demanded to know why a neighbor had any legal standing over his own daughter, his voice rising in the doorway, until Dolores calmly informed him that hospital policy required a designated, responsive contact for medical decisions, and that for 9 consecutive days, the number on file for my parents had gone straight to voicemail, while Desmond had answered every single call, signed every consent form the doctors needed, and sat in the family waiting room most nights before going home. Somewhere in that blur of fear and beeping machines, when the doctors needed someone to approve an emergency procedure to stabilize my heart rhythm, it had been Desmond's signature on the form, not my father's. My father was 2,000 miles away, toasting champagne at a rehearsal dinner. My mother tried to soften it. They came back as soon as the wedding was over. They never meant for it to be 9 days. They assumed I was fine because no one had called to say otherwise. I finally found my voice, hoarse from disuse, and reminded her I had called her twice from that very bed. She never picked up. She had no answer for that. My father muttered something about how families make sacrifices, how Wendy's wedding couldn't be rescheduled. And I understood. In that moment, this wasn't a misunderstanding or bad timing. This was simply who they were, who they'd always been. I'd spent 34 years excusing it as busyness or bad luck, instead of calling it what it actually was. Desmond stood quietly near the window through most of it, letting me handle my own parents, only stepping in when my father tried to insist on driving me home himself. "She already has a ride arranged," Desmond said simply, and something about the calm certainty in his voice made my father back down in a way nothing else had. Dolores discharged me herself 2 hours later. It was Desmond who wheeled me out to his car. Desmond, who'd already stocked my fridge with soup and set up a recliner by the window so I wouldn't have to climb the stairs to my bedroom right away. Desmond, who'd been quietly building a life raft under me for 6 years, while my own family drifted further away without me ever noticing. My parents flew home from that hospital parking lot with nothing resolved. In the months since, I haven't spoken to either of them. Not out of spite, out of a clarity I'd never let myself have before. I finally understood that love isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up when your heart is literally failing, and stay until you're strong enough to stand again. Desmond and I are engaged now. Every time I look at the hospital bracelet I kept in my nightstand drawer, I remember exactly who chose me when it mattered most. And it was never the people I expected. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. This is Second Seat Stories, and there's a new one, everyone.